Alright, lesson 3, fundamental manual transmission power takeoff. Describe the fundamental manual transmission power takeoffs. Give information, construction, operation, lubrication on transmission power takeoffs. Reference TM9 8000. Learning event 1. Describe the type of the construction operation of the manual transmission vehicle. The standing with a still large amount of the power is required to start the move of the vehicle is motion. Large amount of the effort is needed to keep the motion. This is because the vehicle is moved with the wheel time of the same with the motion vehicle is standing still. It tends to remain still. Vehicle engine has enough power to turn the force to keep the vehicle moving on the good road and move from standing position. More power is needed. The more power the need of the operating of the vehicle off the road, the rough ground, with the climbing up steep hills. To obtain the power needed with the driver to keep the vehicle operating properly under all conditions of the transmission installed with the vehicle. Some military wheeled vehicles use manual transmission. This transmission provides operated with a group of the gear ratio of the increase of the engine turning power to meet the real road conditions. Since the engine does not deliver enough power to low speed, the operator must place the gears in, and the transmission for the gear ratio of the wheel will keep vehicle moving the engine speed with the medium of the range of the first, forcing the vehicle to do low engine speed with the called lugging the engine, which result in the engine wear and the possible damage. Meaning they also provide with the permit for the operator to move the vehicle in reverse. You can make the engine run backward so that the transmission provided the meaning of the reverse of the engine power output of the gears. Trim, wrist, and receive the transmitting end for the torque engine from the other, and creep the gears of the passive through directly. Each shift position, except for the direct drive and the overdrive, will provide with the increase of the torque delivered by the engine. The shift position of the transmission speed with the ratio of the number of the speed of the side of the transmission will depend on the side of the type of the vehicle. For example, the transmission of the M151 quarter-ton truck has four forward speeds and a single reverse. Commercial sedan has a small vehicle with a powerful engine might have a transmission that has only 3 forward speeds and 1 single reverse. A large truck tractor vehicle sometimes have the transmission provided with the 15 forward speeds and 3 reverse speeds. It's possible to mount the transmission in several different locations. One wheel vehicle is bolted with the rear of the engine. The construction makes a single solid unit of the engine, clutch of the transmission. Some vehicles that provide with the movements of the mount of the transmission housing assembly. Support of the transmission also acts with the rear engine support rubber pads on the mounting surface for preventing engine transmission vibration noise being sent with the vehicle body. Types of transmission. 2 types of manual and selective speed transmission that use the wheel vehicles and the sliding gear constant mesh type. Sliding gear with the first type of the U with the transmission speed with the rear order were abided with the sliding of the gear with the mount with the spleen with the main shaft of the floor with the rearward mesh with the other gears. The flying shaft with the containment of the grooves running lengthwise allowed with the gear to slide back and forth freely when the gears turn with the shaft of the wood force with the turn the same speed. Earlier sliding gear transmission with either the spur teeth of the gears and which made shifting between speeds very hard. The straight spur tooth gears were noisy and very when operation. Constant mesh transmission is better with the sliding gear transmission because of the major working of the gears always mesh for the shifting of the one done with the gear clutches. The gear clutch consists of the external gear with the teeth with the outside with the mesh for the matching internal gear with the teeth on the inside of the gear clutch with the mesh with much easier for the 2 external tooth gears shifting in the various ratios which made better than synchronizing assembly with a constant mesh transmission. Synchronizing adding small friction clutch with a single sliding gear clutch with a constant mesh transmission. Clutch force of the 2 gears rotate the same speed, and the teeth from that so that they shift, made without gear noise. Presently, manual transmission military vehicles use some of the features of each side of the 2 of the types. Or your construction of transmission. In the lesson, we cannot be possibly discover each of the transmission military vehicle. Therefore, the construction operation presented with the base on the simple 3-speed, 4 and 1-speed reverse transmission using smaller wheeled vehicles. It should be kept in mind that all manual transmissions similar construction. When a vehicle becomes large and more speed ratio, the heavier the parts are needed. Manual transmission use the gears and increase the engine torque of the delivery of the wheel. These gears are made of very exact measurement that operating quite under hard use. The mounting of the gears must correct with a few thousandths of an inch. Transmission case provided with a firm base with the required shaft of the gear is mounted with the most of the transmission care. This is made of the cast iron view models that have been made with aluminum alloy, reduced weight with the cast iron provides a strong, long-lasting case and low cost, and so all drawbacks cast iron break easily, heavy, and is not easily repaired. Or in addition to mounting all of the inner component of the case of all the bridge wire, the storage point with the gearbox, lubricating oil with the plate, plugs on the bottom side of the case with the provide with the means of checking the oil level, the draining with the lubricant, at least plug with the 1005 with the square type head. The front case of the machine with a smooth surface match with the mounting strip at the rear of the engine fly housing. The ensemble of the mount of the front of the transmission contains the bell-shaped housing that becomes the rear of the flying wheel housing. A military transmission opening the mounting surfaces are made with the right and left side, but they cause case allow the attaching additional gearbox with the thing called power takeoff. When not using the metal plate with the bolted over the openings to seal the transmission case. Opening in the front of the rear of the case of machine with a smooth finish to provide the accurate motion mounting of the shaft bearing with the top of the case with the opening with a smooth machine edge of threaded mounting holes over the cover assembly. Inside of the transmission, the case of the three shafts are parallel to each other. The upper part of the case is directly in line with the add and rear of the center of the engine crankshaft of the input of the main shaft. Described below for the input of the main shaft and counter shaft of the reverse side of the shaft of the short of the shaft is mounted off the one side of the main shaft and the counter shaft. At the front of the input shaft, the small part of the shaft of the cover of the pilot, where the pilot fits into the pilot with the bearing of the center of the engine flywheel support for the front of the input shaft of the rest of the rear of the just to the rear of the pilot with the spline in the air of the shaft. The clutch driven the wrist from the mounts of the spline with the provide the connection between the transmission and the engine. Rear of the spline long in the smooth area of the shaft of the engine of the gear with the input driving the gear that will be just inside of the front of the transmission case where the shaft is mounted in position. The rear of the input gear with another gear will normally be slightly different from the side of the input gear. The external gear portion of the synchronizer gear clutch, both above the gears, are made with the part of the shaft at the rear of the input. Shaft is hollow, smooth round opening of the machine with the rear of the shaft to mount a roller bearing. The bearing supports the front of the main shaft of the input shaft is support with the proper position bearing by bearing at the front of the case. Most transmissions are used large ball bearings and support input shaft of the bearings are pressed over the input shaft of the snap ring with the inch of the bearing stays in proper position on the shaft of the end of the case. The bearing retainer bolted in front of the transmission case holds the input shaft bearing in the position. The bearing retainer is usually cast iron flange with a long tube-like sleeve extending forward from the center, and the position sleeve is around the non-touching input shaft provides surface mounting of the clutch releasing bearing. To the crank counter shaft, the mounted with directly below the in line with the transmission input and main shaft on the heavier more vehicles. Counter shaft assemblies the sear of the gears, different side of the patch on the seal shaft for more than 4 or more gears are used the largest in front of the large gear with the front of the counter shaft of the mesh of the input drive gear with the on of the 3-speed transmission. Counter shaft of the gears at the front of the rear of the driving gear, second speed with the first speed, reverse speed. Many of the transmissions same gear with the both low and reverse. The cams, counter shaft bearings are in front of the rear of the transmission support. Align the shaft assembly with the case on smaller transmission. The counter shaft gears are made by 2 separate items. The counter shaft on the transmission is pressed into the case and held in position with a plate or pin, which prevents the counter shaft from rotating and turning. The gears are forged in single item mounted on the shaft of the roller bearings. This allows the gears to turn while the shaft remains still. The gear is sometimes called the cluster gear. Of the main shaft assembly located in the rear of the same center line with the input shaft at the front of the shaft of the short pilot section of the roller bearing the rear of the input shaft of the front and support of the main shaft of the located behind the pilot section of the shaft of the spline with the section extended all the way to the rear end. Some shafts have the single side of the spline section while the other splines are several sizes along the main shaft of the one. Some shafts are smooth to the machine surfaces are located between the spline areas along the shaft. The smooth surfaces of the bow that are not directly connected to the shaft of the design will depend on the manufacturer. Alright, starting at the front of the main shaft with a simple 3 sliding gear transmission front gear with which will be the second and third speed gear with the gear with the mounting upon the spline part of the main shaft that can be moved free forward and backward. The rear of the second and third speed with the gear with the first reverse speed gear. First and reverse speed gear. This is mounted with the spline of the main shaft with the rear of the main shaft is supported with a large bearing. Usually ball type of the mount with the rear of the case with the cast iron bearing retainer hold in the rear of the case hold with the bearing in the position bearing retainer is mounted on the oil seal of the rides again with the smooth part of the main shaft. The seal prevents the gear of the transmission case. The escape of the main shaft that passes through the rear of the case with the outside of the rear of the case. The main shaft of the spline with the red section with the mount with the drive flange with the yoke is held with the plate with a large nut with the cotter pin and propeller shaft with the drive the shaft with the connect with the flange and yoke at the rear of the transmission carry the engine power toward the rear of the vehicle. Some of the military vehicles have an additional gearbox called a transfer assembly bolted to the rear of the transmission cable. The type of the construction of the bearing retainer drive flange are not used into the power flows directly to the transfer assembly. Operation of transmission. Each model transmission, same method of control of the gear of the construction, very well model model. Control lever may be mounted on the top of the cover to come up through the floor of the vehicle cab. The lever may be mounted on the upper under the steering wheel of the steering column. Tactical military wheeled vehicles, your top cover the mounted control lever inside the transmission shift of the control part of the mount with the top of the transmission case will cover assembly. More military vehicles have shift mechanism mounted on the transmission cover. The method of the construction provides easier repair and disassembly. Two or more shifter shafts are placed for the drills, passage for the cover of the airline with the main shaft of the shifter shafts can move forward, backward, and stay in the consensual neutral position. These three-position shifters can be provided with the two-speed new transmission speeds along central and neutral position. The three-speed forward transmission will have the two shifter shafts, control mechanism, larger transmission with the more speed, most have additional shifter shafts. Alright, to hold the shifter shaft of the position, pop it above the spring line with the passage, deliver the drill at the right angle to the shifter shaft with the pop of the ball with the spring push with the steel ball with the tend of the reset of the shifter shaft with the prevent movement. The three dents made with the side with each of the shifter shaft with the provide one of each of the shift pass. Each shift position. Mount each of the shifter shaft with the correct position. Shifter fork of the will be held with the plate with the bolt with the pin with the forward extend with the shifter shaft. Down in the cave, the pit of the groove model made in the sliding of the gear. The top of the shifter fork with the slide with the made to receive the lower end of the control lever. Control lever is mounted with the transmission. Cover the ball joint, allowing with the control lever to move forward with the backward right or left. Pin over the ball joint, prevent the level from spinning, and then circle the upper part of the lever outside of the transmission extend within the vehicle cab. Located between the shifter shaft in line with the pop of the ball with the spring with the interlocking device. The device is usually a ball or a pin engaging knots of each of the shifter shaft that enable to slide sideways between the shifter shaft. Interlocking device prevents the two-speed from being engaged at the same time. Alright, learning event 2. Describe the power flow and lubrication of the manual transmission. Increase the torque delivered with the engine transmission depends on the basic principle for the small driving large gear. Manual sliding gear transmission provides several speed ranges with the slide different side of the smaller gears in and out of the mesh and the larger gear with the understand the complete operation of the 3-speed forward and single reverse speed transmission is presented below. Anytime the clutch pedal with the upper release position, clutch is engaged. At the time the clutch pedal disc is locked between the driving members, the clutch assembly, clutch disc line, and push shaft of the transmission there with the direct mechanical connection from the engine to the transmission. This shows your figure 10 shows the transmission gear in high position. You have your main shaft, you have your second and third speed gears, main driving gear, input shaft, counter driving gear. Power flow is the engine of the transmission input shaft, which turn with the same speed of the engine, and since the counter shaft driving the gears always mesh for the input shaft of the main drive gear, it will also be turning, but opposite direction of the main driving gear of the input shaft. The input gear is slightly smaller than the counter shaft drive gear. Therefore, counter shaft gear will turn slower with the engine speed with it or at reduction. Two sliding gears, the main shaft do not mesh with any of the other counter shaft on neutral speed with no main shaft gear of the mesh with the counter gear shaft gear of the brakes in the power flow with the path power flow with the end of the counter shaft of the vehicle's operated levers to play for the transmission. First speed, first step to relief of the clutch disc. The figure 11 shows the gears in low position, main shaft bearing, first and reverse speed gear, second and third gear, speed gear, external ring, input shaft, counter shaft, driving gear, counter speed gear, counter shaft speed gear, counter reverse speed gear, and shove the input with the shaft. So, when the clutch pedal down, the input shaft is not turning with the transmission control lever, the move within the first speed position, the top of the control lever, the move with the rear of the bottom of the lever, inside of the transmission moving forward, the lower end of the level, the force, the first reverse shifter of shaft of the fork with the gear to move forward. First and reverse speeds, gears slide along with the spline with the main shaft of the mesh and with the first speed gear with the counter shaft. When the vehicle operates relief, the clutch pedal with the clutch is engaged with the transmission driven in the first speed with the power flow of the engine, with the input shaft with the counter shaft with the main shaft with the out of the rear of the transmission. Small input of driving gear is driving the large counter shaft with the driving gear, therefore increase the power obtained. As the second increase of the power is increased, is gained with the smaller gear with of the counter shaft of the drive, and the larger first reverse speed gear of the main shaft of the first and reverse gear is spline. The main shaft of the double increase the power delivered to the main shaft of the transmission output of the direction of the rotation turning direction change of the twice of the power path. Two external gears are placed in mesh of the turn in each wheel with the direction of the road different direction. When locking at the transmission with the input shaft of the driven with the clockwise direction of the engine, this will force the counter shaft to turn in the opposite direction with the counterclockwise. If the counter shaft of the drive gear drive of the gear of the main shaft will be forced to turn clockwise, which same as the input shaft. This shows your 12, shows the constant mesh of the transmission assembly, shows the gear shifter, third and fourth of the shifter lug shaft, shifter shaft of the first and reverse shifter fork, companion flange, main shaft plane, rear bearing, the counter shaft bearing, main shaft bearing, counter shaft, transmission case, counter front bearing, clutch release yoke, main shaft, front bearing, input shaft, clutch housing, input shaft, shifter shaft, lock and ball, third and Aipd shifter fork. The shift to the second speed is normally made with the vehicle in the motion shifted directly first and second speed. In the vehicle, the operator with to release the disengage of the club, move the shift forward with the lever for the first through the neutral second speed position. Inside the transmission cable, the lower end of the shift lever, the force of the first and reverse and speed of the shifter and shaft and the fork of the gear to move the more rearward to the neutral position. When the neutral position is reached, the shifter lever moves out of the first and reverse speed with the shifter fork of the sideways of the slide. Second and third speed is shafted fork of the second and third speed gear is forced to slide the rear along with the main shaft and balance spline until the meshing with the second speed gear with the on the counter shaft. Proper position is reached with the stop steel popping the ball with the push for the dam with the shifter shaft with the spring pressure for the hold of the green air mesh. Vehicle operates on the engage with the clutch of the power flow with the input shaft with the counter shaft with the secondary speed gear with the and the output main shaft with the increase with the power is gained with the input with the counter shaft. There's very little difference for the size and second speed with the gear with the counter shaft with the second and third gear. Speed gears of the main shaft of the drive. The gears nearly of the same size, but this will only be slightly changed with the engine torque. Large increase needed, and the second speed with the gear to cover enough powers increases. And it increases the gain between the input and the counter shaft of the drive gear with the second speed. Total increase of the engine torque is not great as second speed is with the first speed. Therefore, the output speed is greater. Power flow of the input shaft of the counter shaft of the main shaft through the gearing. To shift the transmission from second to third speed, the vehicle operator relieves the disengage of the clutch, move the shifter lever to the second and third position. After the lever, move the rear of the top of the pivot that turns with the ball joint with the top of the cover, the bottom of the lever, move forward inside of the case. The bottom of the shifter lever to force with the second and third speed shifters. Shift fork and gear to move forward. The second and third spear gear slides forward along the spline of the main shaft, moves out in second speed through the neutral into the third speed rotation. Poppet ball spring hold of the gear in proper position. Second and third speed with the gears move toward the third position. Internal teeth mesh external gears of the rear of the input shaft locks and input shaft of the main shaft. The internal type of the gear inside of the front of the second and third speed gear together with external gear on the rear of the input shaft from the gear clutch. When the input and the main shaft lock together, the power of the engine flow with the input shaft, the output with the main shaft, out with the main shaft when the clutch is engaged. The counter shaft will drive driven with the during the speed, but the shaft will transfer no power. And third speed with the direct drive with the third speed forward with the transmission. There will be no increase of the engine torque on the twisting of the force. The real vehicle should not have been moving the transmission gear with the shift in neutral to the reverse speed. The operator will relieve the disengage of the clutch, move the control lever to the neutral, reverse position, and bottom of the control lever forces of the first and reverse speed shifter shaft and fork to gear into the move of the rear. After the first reverse gear with the move of to the rear, it will mesh with the reverse idler gear with the bottom with the one side with the main with the counter shaft with the counter shaft. The reverse idler gear is meshed with both the first and reverse sliding gear with the main shaft with the reverse gear on the counter shaft. During all the transmission forward speed with the output of the shaft of the same direction, input shaft of the drive and the output shaft of the opposite direction of the input shaft. Additional gear must be able to place in the gear trim and this reverse idle gear. When looking at the transmission front of the input with the shaft of the clockwise with the counter shaft with the turns, counterclockwise reverse idler gear turns clockwise with the reversing gear and main shaft turns counterclockwise. Each of the driving gears is trained smaller with the driven gear, thus larger increase the torque of this game with the reverse speed. Anytime the small and large gear would use the increase the power of the gearbox and nearby necessary to give up speed or revolutions per minute. More engine power delivered to the vehicle wheels of the reverse than any other shaft of the system of the vehicle will travel slower with the forward speed. Each shift of the detent and reset of the shaft in line with the interlocking device for the neutral position. Recall of the interlocking device is usually a ball pin engaged with the notch for each of the shifter and shaft. The one of the shifter shaft is moved to the neutral position. Reset the interlock, move the out of line with the device passageway. The movement shall force the interlocking device and slide with the side of the into the reset of the opposite shifter shaft. The action looks like a shaft in neutral position. The shifter shaft is moved the neutral blocks interlocking device, preventing movement of the other shaft. The both shaft is once again with the neutral position. When the transmission is three shift shafts of the two interlocking must be to ensure only one shaft moves at one time that prevents the transmission from being played with more than one gear at a time, placing the transmission in one speed called the locked and GM gearbox with the powers that apply with the gearbox could be damaged or destroyed. Lubrication. Lower part of the transmission case contained with the gear oil amount is determined by the level of the plug side of the case. The oil in the bottom of the case covers a bunch of the countershaft of the gear. Assembly. When the transmission is operating, the countershaft of the turning oil is thrown by the gear over the entire inside of the case. Oil seal the input of the output of the shaft prevent oil from leaking out of the case. Some of the transmission metal plates cause the oil slingers in front of the shaft of the beginning direct oil back to the center of the case. Lubricating oil reaches the difficult place while weighing the drilled passage in the gear shaft. Ventilation. The gearbox is placed in the operation friction over the working part of the generator enough heat for the provide to warm the entire item. As the component heats up the air inside of the air and inside of the case expands, some means it is not provided low. Let expanding air cases escape from the gearbox. High pressure will present in the case too. The much pressure inside of the case will force the lubricating oil past the oil seals outside, possibly damage the seals. Prevent assembly installed at the top of the gear case to allow the excessive pressure to escape. Constant mesh transmission. The earlier mode sliding gear transmission were very difficult to shift over one gear to another. Were very noisy during operation. Hard shifting was improved by using constant meshing gear. Gears mounted on the main shaft are placed in the matching gears in the counter shaft. This causes the constant mesh gear on the main shaft of the drive at any time in the transmission is operation. Alright, all main shaft of the constant mesh gear they will have to be free running type of these gear of the mount of the main shaft of the meeting means of being rather with them with the spline with the type of the mounting. There's no direct mechanical connection between the contact meshing gears. Main shaft of the gears cannot run free with the knot, and the gears run free with the main shaft of the connected with the shaft of the means with the sliding gear clutch. Sliding gear of the gear clutch is mounted with the spline with the main shaft of the allowed with the move backward and forward. When the transmission control of the move of the sliding gear of the move and the mesh of the one with the constant of the gear meshes main shaft of the gear drive of the main shaft of the move the gear clutch. To reduce the noise of the moving of the gears during the operation, helical gears use the plate for the straight of the tube of the gears, spur gear, the helical gear are played with the angle across the face of the gear, but the construction cover the gear of the teeth of the sliding the mesh with less noise. The disadvantage of the helical gears is in the angle of the teeth that tends to cover the gears to move endwise of the shift of the pad, producing the thrust of the underload helical gears using the gearbox. Thrust washers and bearings are installed with the control of the end of the thrust gears. Synchro mesh transmissions. Hard and noisy shifting of the coil of the clashing of the two gears brought up together while turning different speed. The constant meshing gear and the clutch type of transmission improved the early sliding gear model, but these were still some shifting noises. Synchronizers assembly would have added the constant mesh type gearbox to move all gear clash while shifting gears. Synchronizers is a friction device which causes the two gears to turn at the same speed before they are brought into the mesh. When two gears are brought into the mesh by turning same direction at the same speed, there is no gear noise. Some of the cone clutches made in the synchronizer assembly are applied with before the teeth of the sliding gear with the main gear come in contact. Some impulse synchronizers consist of a hub and a sleeve. The hub is mounted with the main shaft beneath the spine, with allow the assembly to move forward and backward. The sleeve is spine on the outside of the hub is able to slide with the hub sleeve is held together with a neutral position by detent balls under spring pressure. Detent balls spring with our mount with the passages drilled in the center of the synchronizer hub. The balls are in detent groove in the inside and the center of the sleeve, inside of the inner edge of the hub and rounds in cone clutch surfaces. The gears mounted on the front and rear synchronizer assembly have the smoothing steel cone surface of the face of the matching the bronze cone with the synchronizer. The synchronizer assemblies are designed to operate either in front or the rear of the two transmission speed, remaining with the central position of the neutral. The neutral position hub is in the center of the gears front of the rear sleeve of the center over the hub. As the vehicle operates, move the control lever of the shifter and the shaft fork, move from the synchronizer sleeve toward the gear to the engage. The popped balls and springs holding the hub of the sleeve together under the spring pressure. The entire assembly slides toward the gear. The first part of the synchronizer to the contact with the gear is the bronze cone clutch. If it's the cone clutch, serve that both of the synchronizing gear comes together. The speed and the two items made the same. Our vehicle operator continues to apply pressure transmission. Control lever sleeve with the synchronizing force hover over the popped ball, sliding along with the top of the hub toward the gear. The slide and slides mesh with the small external gear made with as part of the transmission constant mesh gear. The action locks of the synchronizer assemble the constant mesh gear, but the power is delivered from the constant mesh gear to synchronizing assemble the main shaft of the outer rear of the transmission. Learning event 3. Describe the construction, operation, and power takeoffs. And we're going to cut the tape there.